Tatsmewi Nimlotoas. Good morning, my friends. Thanks for having me here today. It's really nice to see all of you. Some of you I've met virtually, so I'm real. This is me in person. When I was a kid, my brother and I understood time based on episodes of television. It was, if one of us asked our mom, "How much longer is it gonna be?" she would reply with, "One Ramblin' Rod," or "One Mr. Rogers." This meant 1 hour or a half an hour, respectively. And if you don't know who Ramblin' Rod is, it's okay. Don't worry. Someone here knows who Ramblin' Rod is. You can ask. Like so many people from my generation and beyond, I loved Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. A half-hour children's program that not only helped me understand the concept of time, but also taught me about friendship, imagination, and the importance of learning about the world around me. Fred Rogers was a Presbyterian minister who understood how to connect heart to heart, human to human, with children, with all of us. In preparing today's sermon, which was not an easy one to write, more on that in a moment, I thought of a quote from Mr. Rogers. You've probably heard it. When I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, "Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping." To this day, especially in times of disaster, I remember my mother's words, and I'm always comforted by realizing that there are still so many helpers, so many caring people in the world. It is in witnessing the helpers, he says, that we find hope. Today's gospel passage is one that makes me uneasy. On the surface, it's a miracle story. Jesus prevents disaster and calms a stormy sea and a windy night with 3 words: peace, be still. He asks his followers, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" This, after he spent all day on the shores of the Sea of Galilee sharing parables, teaching stories about a possible new future free of oppression, where all people are enveloped by God's love. But this story of Jesus calming the storm is one that is often misused to inflict shame on listeners. Too many have interpreted and taught this story as something along the lines of, if you have enough faith in troubled times, you have nothing to fear. This, I think, is nonsense. It is spiritual bypassing at its finest. This interpretation ignores suffering, ignores struggle, ignores disaster, ignores peril, ignores the very real emotions inherent in tragedy. It wants to pretend uncomfortable feelings don't exist or are not worthy of our time or attention. It's trying to convince you that God doesn't have time for your feelings either. This interpretation wants to move on to happier things. Friends, I don't know about you, but no part of me wants a God who does not understand how I feel. And I have a very hard time believing that God incarnated into human flesh not to feel. After all, we witness Jesus' feelings throughout the Gospels. His fatigue and worry from drawing large crowds, his anger at the social, political, economic, and religious injustices of his time, his sadness, empathy, and compassion for those who grieve, his ability to forgive in the face of betrayal, and yes, his fear of death and suffering. So what is happening as Jesus calms the storm? First, it's important to know that the writers of Mark's gospel are living in Rome under the rule of the most notorious and arguably the most dangerous Caesar of the empire's approximately 500 years, Nero. Nero, who murdered his mother and wives and called himself a god. Nero, who executed many early Christians in what was known as Nero's circus. He was so dangerous, in fact, that the book of Revelation identifies him by the 666 that appeared on his coins. The writers of Mark's gospel are not strangers to suffering, oppression, or persecution. Neither are the fishermen disciples accompanying Jesus in the boats. Galilee, at the time of Jesus, was a place of social unrest. It was home to over 200 villages and diverse groups of people who were dependent on the resources in and around the lake to survive. And it's 33 miles around this lake. The people made their livelihoods on and around the water as fishermen and farmers and traders. In fact, this cultural history of being part and in direct relationship with the land and the water is so strong, it's still a symbol of Palestinian freedom and liberation today. Like on my kufia, there's fishing nets, ancient olive groves, grain farming, and trade routes, all symbols still used today. Galilee and its large freshwater lake are located in the northern part of Palestine, currently called the State of Israel. At the time of Jesus, this area was a beautiful but dangerous landscape. It was prone to sudden and destructive storms and was a hotbed of political activity, some of which was violent. Rome did not honor the right to assemble and saw any large group as a threat to Roman security and would respond with violence. Sounds familiar? It was in the middle of this social unrest, among people who were suffering, that Jesus chose to begin his ministry, and it's here our story takes place. The writers of Mark's gospel and the disciples who accompanied Jesus away from the crowds and across the water know the stories of their faith. The writers of the gospel recognize their experience with suffering and violence in the stories of Jesus. The people in Jesus' time recognize their experience with suffering and violence in the stories of the Old Testament. Across generations of storytellers and story listeners, they all seek hope, salvation, and meaning, much like we do today. When the disciples wake Jesus on the boat, saying, "Teacher, do you not care that we're perishing?" Jesus does not ignore them and go back to sleep. He does not admonish them. He helps them. He calms the waters and the winds of chaos. Peace, be still. The men are astounded because they know the psalm in which God does the same. He made the storm be still and the sea was hushed. So when Jesus says, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" He is not responding to their fear of the storm. He's responding to their shock over the miracle. And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this that even the wind and sea obey him?" The disciples know they have now seen and experienced God. "Look for the helpers," Nancy Rogers told her son, Fred Rogers. Not as a way to ignore or bypass the suffering of the world, but as a way to recognize hope in the darkest of moments. We're living through horrific times. We're witnessing genocides in Palestine and Sudan, horrors in Ukraine, Haiti, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Empire is still up to its nasty business. Our own country is complicit in so much violence. We continue to peel back the layers of racism, homophobia, and transphobia, ableism, economic inequities, and so much more. I ask myself almost every day, where is our humanity? Then I remember our stories. It's in our shared stories that we find our common humanity. Look for the helpers. Better yet, be the helpers. That is where God lives. Amen.